The faculty meetings never work that way. So good evening and welcome to Rice, especially those of you who are not every day part of the Rice community. We do not have one of those cute little videos that tell you to silence your cell phones, so just silence your cell phones. Anyway, part of the President's Lecture Series, of which this is one, this is meant to provide the Houston communities with an opportunity to hear from some of the most important thinkers and actors in our world today. As I said before, we especially welcome those of you from outside the Rice community as our guests, but we are pleased that you have joined so many members of the Rice community tonight. Tonight's speaker is remarkable for a lot of reasons, but we are especially proud of one of them, namely that Luis Ricardo Fraga is one of our own graduates. That is the earliest in a presidential lecture series that anybody has gotten applause. I just want you to know. A native of Corpus Christi, Texas, he graduated with a doctorate in political science at Rice in 1984, having already completed his undergraduate degree, in fact, in the same class that I was, at some school in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which my wife habitually refers to as the Rice of the North. Dr. Fraga has gone on to distinguish himself, and through that Rice, in a host of areas. He's actually the first Rice alum to speak as part of the President's Lecture Series since Dr. Robert Curl spoke about the discovery of Buckminster fullerene in 1997. I leave it to you to decide which is more complicated, the structure of carbon-60 or the election of 2016. I want to especially thank Richard Tapia for suggesting Dr. Fraga as a speaker and encouraging him to come. We are pleased that this lecture offers a way for us to celebrate National Hispanic Heritage Month. Dr. Fraga has served on the faculty of 4 different institutions. So we're tied in that too, just so you know. And at each stop, he has made distinctive contributions, both as a scholar and teacher, as academic administrator, and very, very importantly, as a mentor. Over his career, he has won no fewer than 16 teaching and mentoring awards, which explains why in 2006, reportedly, when he and his wife, Charlene, decided to leave Stanford for the University of Washington, it was reported that there was a near uprising of students and alumni clamoring for him to remain in Palo Alto. Such was the impact that he had during that community during his 16 years there. Today, his legacy at Stanford includes the Luis R. Fraga Fellowship in Institutional Transformation, which was established in his honor at the Haas Center for Public Service when he left. Currently, Dr. Fraga is the Notre Dame Professor in Transformative Latino Leadership, Professor of Political Science, and co-director of the Institute for Latino Studies, one of the country's most admired centers of its kind. Dr. Fraga is one of those scholars whose research and service to his institution, community, and country are all deeply intertwined. His research seeks to understand, among other things, American political development and how institutions help or inhibit citizens' participation in politics. In particular, he has written about the importance of Latino politics in an age of demographic transformation that we know, of course, quite well in Harris County and in Texas, and I would in fact add at Rice, where the Hispanic population, that is in Harris County, Texas, has surpassed 40% and 35%, respectively, of our overall populations. As the same demographic shift makes its way across the country at varying speeds, his insights into our national politics, and indeed this year's election, become even more valuable. Dr. Fraga's career is rich in experience and production, so I'm only going to mention a few highlights. He was selected as a fellow at the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard University, as well as being named a fellow at the Center for Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences at Stanford. He's written on urban education reform and multi-ethnic politics in the advanced industrial democracy. His latest book is Latinos in the New Millennium, an almanac of opinion, behavior, and policy preferences, which draws on data from the groundbreaking 2006 Latino National Survey to create a comprehensive profile of Latino political life in the United States. He is, as one colleague at Notre Dame suggested, quote, one of the most distinguished American political scientists working on the increasing central issue of the role of Latinos in American politics. At Notre Dame, his role as a mentor to students has been and continues to be central to his influence and impact. His charge as the Arthur Foundation Endowed Professor of Transformative Latino Leadership is to establish a program that will inform, challenge, and inspire the next generation of leaders who choose to serve as advocates on behalf of Latino communities. Dr. Fraga has stated that, quote, without a doubt that leadership will come in part from Latino community members themselves. However, it will also come from all of us, regardless of ethnic and racial background, who are positioned to make decisions that will affect these communities. With this in mind, and anticipating you will bring full clarity to the election of 2016, please join me in welcoming Professor Luis Fraga back to Houston and to Rice University as he gives the President's Lecture Series presentation, The Changing American Voter in 2016 and Beyond. Dr. Luis Fraga.
Thank you very much, President LeBron, for the invitation to be with you and for that lovely and generous introduction. I also want to sincerely thank Professor Richard Tapia. This would not have happened were it not for Professor Tapia and the fact that at Notre Dame we say divine providence allowed us to reconnect down in the valley in Texas as advisors to the advanced program for what is now called the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley. Advanced programs, if you don't know it, are programs designed to try to increase the number of women in STEM fields. And it was as a result of those conversations and our getting to know one another that he very generously offered to try to bring me to Rice, and with the support of President LeBron, we're just I am very, very thrilled to be able to be here. Richard, as you know, is a model of commitment to both academia and to enhancing opportunities for everyone to be in academia. Richard, we are in your debt. Thank you for all of your work. Now, I also want to acknowledge in the audience one of my former professors, Bob Stein. Bob, where are you? There he is. And also Professor Chandler Davidson. Chandler, if you are here. Chandler and Bob were both critical mentors of mine. I would not be here with you and have the opportunity to do the work that I have been able to do were it not for the work of these two gentlemen. Maybe gentleman applies more to one of you than to the other, but I will say to these two gentlemen, I want to say publicly, you gave me my academic voice. And for that, I am eternally grateful, as I am to Rice University, for giving me the opportunity to develop that voice. I will always be grateful to Rice for believing in me. I'm a political scientist who has studied the ever-complex interaction of demographics and the evolution of American politics for over 30 years. This election is like me being a child in a candy store. Wow. As much as I do not like to admit it, and few political scientists do, perhaps none of us predicted that we would be having the type of election that we're having now. It is an election season, and this election is filled with unexpected patterns of support among voters, both those who support Republicans and those who support Democrats. Now, we have a set of choices to make with regards to this election. Choices, of course, with regards to which candidates we might choose to support, whether for president or down ballot, which political party we may choose to contribute to financially and otherwise. But I want to suggest that we might take this evening to view the election in a slightly different way. We could, of course, continue to view it as a partisan. If we view this election as a partisan, we would view it as an opportunity to win. Say anything, do anything, claim anything in order for your preference to have a higher probability of winning. We could, of course, address this as a pundit. And if we were pundits, we would want to make this a competition and be able to predict the winner. I may do that toward the end of my talk, but we'll go from there. We would want to make it a newsworthy contest. We would want to talk about how close the election is. We would want to talk about the latest poll and who's up and how many percentage points they're up and they're not. Pundits, this has to be just the best election ever for pundits. As a scholar, we could address it solely as a scholar. And scholars might want to use this election as an opportunity to try to understand something fundamental about the distribution of partisan affiliations and its potential impact over time, and whether or not this is the forerunner of some type of what we call realigning election or not. Important scholarly contributions. All of those are worthy enterprises, partisan, pundit, or scholar. But tonight I want to suggest to you that we have the time and, frankly, the privilege to consider this election as a citizen, as someone who is not just interested in winning, predicting, or making a long-term scholarly contribution. But I suggest to you that we might want to take a moment to think about what this election tells us about our country, our voters, our leaders, our future, and especially the next generation. What might this election help us understand about our responsibilities of citizenship? And how might it help us exercise those responsibilities in a way, or maybe even force us to exercise those responsibilities in a way that tell us something fundamental about who we are as a people, as a nation, as a community. What I'm trying to suggest to us is that we use this evening, and my comments to you this evening, as a way to hold ourselves as citizens and voters to much higher standards than just winning, predicting, or simple scholarly contribution, and that we hold ourselves to the standards of thinking very carefully about what kind of a contribution we want to leave as a legacy to the next generation of Americans in this country. We'll see if this works. And so it does. I want to begin by talking a bit about demographic change. And as you know, the United States is today living, as was said earlier, certainly you've experienced this in Houston, living through one of the greatest demographic transformations in American history. We've experienced them in the past, but in what ways are today's demographic transformations different? And how have they already, and how are they likely to affect our politics and policymaking in 2016 and beyond? To begin to get at that, and this is just the beginning, I want to focus your attention, ask you to focus your attention on this following line graph. This is a line graph that many of you see, and there are a variety of versions of it. This is a graph that shows the distribution, if you will, the ethnic racial distribution, or what sociologists increasingly are calling the ethno-racial distribution of the American population. Now, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not suggesting that these categories are somehow immutable and that there is any homogeneity associated with each of these different categories. You'll notice that I did not include the number for people of 2 or more races, an increasing category, maybe as much as 4% within our population. But it's important to remember that these sorts of demographic data are data that are driven by how we choose to classify ourselves in this country. We are not told which of these groups to affiliate with. In the old days, the census had training for census enumerators, where people were given training on shape of nose, texture of hair, pigment of skin. In fact, census enumerators had a little sample card that had different degrees of pigment, and they were asked when they knocked on doors and did the census in particular homes to put that card up against someone's skin and decide on that basis what racial or ethnic community they may be part of. We've made progress. We don't do that anymore, but we ask ourselves to put ourselves into these categories. Based on that, what we see are very substantial shifts in race and ethnicity, and those shifts in race and ethnicity are driven in part by 2 unquestionable trends. A growth in the Latino population in the United States, estimated at about 16.3% in 2010, starting with a comparison in 1970, and perhaps, now a good demographer only estimates out maybe 10 years, maybe 15 years. We're going out to 2050 because demographers made these predictions. So I'm using demographers as my fallback, if you will, for justifying this. But these are simply straight line projections of what might happen. They may be as much as almost a third of the population in 2050. Now, I'm unlikely to be around in 2050. And many of you in this audience, particularly my 2 mentors, are unlikely to be here in 2050. But our children will be here, and our grandchildren will be here. And for some of us, maybe our great-grandchildren will be here. So it's important for us to think about the future, to think about the legacy we're going to leave those children and what their lives might be like. The other major trend, of course, is a decline in the percentage of Americans who are or claim some sense of origins in Europe. Whether one prefers the term, and I hope we don't get into the terminology questions, right? I use Latino and Hispanic interchangeably. If you prefer Mexican, if you prefer Ecuadorian, if you prefer Guatemalan, use whatever term you want. White, European American, Caucasian, whatever term you want to use. Here I'm just trying to identify general trends, and what we see is that perhaps by 2050, certainly by 2020, and maybe even by 2040, we will no longer be a majority white population. The point I want you to see is that's very different than where we were in 1970. And these changes are fundamental. Harris County has gone through them. The city of Houston has gone through them. What I'm trying to impress upon you here is the country is going through it as well. Remember, 2040 is only a few years away. Now I want to show you a set of fun graphics that I like. This comes from the Census Bureau and the Pew Hispanic Center. This is a map that shows the concentration of the Hispanic Latino population in the United States. Where are we? Right here, right? In the Houston area at present. This is the distribution of the Latino population. The larger circles represent 3 million, going down to 5,000. These are counties with at least 1,000 Hispanics. This is just the population. This is Texas, Florida, New York, Chicago. I live right here now in South Bend, right here in South Bend. 90 minutes from Chicago. When people ask you, how could you leave Seattle to go to South Bend? I say, it's 90 minutes from Chicago. And they say, why could you leave Seattle to go to South Bend? That's another story. This is Los Angeles in California. This is the distribution of the population in 1980. 1990, 2000, 2010. What did you see in those changes over that period of time across those decades? 80, 90, 2000, 2010. You see 2 very important trends. You see continued Latino population growth in traditional areas of Latino population settlement, but you see a broadening of the Latino population almost throughout the country. Latinos are pretty smart, so they tend not to go to North and South Dakota. On the whole, maybe a little bit of Montana. But in addition to the growth in traditional areas, I'm joking, obviously. I apologize to anyone here from North or South Dakota? One person. I understand why you left and why you're here. In addition to the growth, continued growth of the population in traditional areas, we're seeing a spreading and substantial growth in the South, in areas of the Midwest. Notice the growth around Chicago and around my area of Indiana, and in the Pacific Northwest. There has been a tremendous increase in the presence of Latinos, not just in traditional areas, yes, in traditional receiving areas, and across the entire country. Now, for some of you, that's not particularly new. But it is important to understand that it means that these issues of demographic shift are affecting more local communities than ever before. In one small town of 30,000 people, about 30,000 people, Goshen, Indiana, about 20 minutes away from where I live in South Bend, 51% of the students enrolled in its public schools are now of Latino Hispanic descent. When 10 years ago, there was no one there, virtually no one. Why are they moving to Goshen? They're lost? No, that's not the reason they're going to Goshen. It's a joke. They're going to Goshen because of an explosion in the recreational vehicle industry. And they're working in the recreational vehicle industry as upholsterers and as individuals who do painting and as people who put in dashboards in these vehicles. My point here is there's been a growth across the entire country. The fastest growing rates are in areas of the South, Pacific Northwest, and Midwest, like I said. There are now 4 majority-minority non-white states in the United States: California, Hawaii, New Mexico, and Texas. We know, majority, non-minority, if you will. In the next 5 years, they will include the states of Maryland and Nevada. By 2020, it will also include the states of Arizona, Florida, Georgia, and New Jersey. In 2030, if demographic projections hold, it will include the states of Alabama, Louisiana, and New York. In 2040, Connecticut, Delaware, Illinois, Michigan, Oklahoma, Virginia, and perhaps by 2050, a total of 22 states that will hold 2/3 of the national population will have population distributions that are non-white. It's a different world now than it was in relatively recent past, and these shifts are being experienced by more and more segments of the country than ever before. Well, who are these people? Who are these Latinos? It's Hispanic Heritage Month. Who are these people? Well, let me give you just a little sense about who these people are, and we'll get to the implications for politics here in just a minute, but I want to give you this demographic background so you have it in the back of your mind, so that you think it through, so that you digest it, so that you understand it in ways to then better understand the implications for politics. 63%, notice that the translation here does not entirely hold because I do my things on a Mac, and apparently this was transferred over to a PC. But if you had actual numbers there, you would see that 63% of all Latinos are born in the United States. 63, say that again. 63% of all Latinos currently living in the United States are born in the United States. Since the decade of 1990 to 2000, more Latino population growth has been due to births in the U.S. than to immigration. 11% are naturalized, 8% are eligible to naturalize, they're called long-term permanent residents. Only 15% do not have authorized status. Now, Latinos are a very diverse community. It includes people of Mexican origin, as you know, and Puerto Ricans and Cubans and Guatemalans and many others, but 64% of all Latinos, 64, are of Mexican origin, or would claim Mexican origin. 9.6% are Puerto Rican, 3.8% are Salvadoran, 3.7% are Cuban, 3.2% are Dominican, and the rest are under 3%. So there's a way in which this community is both incredibly diverse with one major group defining its identity in the minds of many Americans. People with origins in Mexico. Now, the reason that becomes significant, just a couple more demographic slides. This one came up. The reason that's significant is that there are some very interesting generational differences in the ethnic racial distribution of our population, including Latinos. This is a graphic that shows the US population by race and ethnicity in the United States in 2014 over the age of 18. See this figure? What percent is Caucasian or white? White, non-Latino? 65%. This is the same graphic for the under 18 population. These are national data. The under 18 population, barely half are white. Notice almost a quarter are Latino, Hispanic, African American, 14%, and Asian, 4.7%. The demographic shift that we're talking about that may happen in the country as a whole has already happened in the generation of our children. The shifts that we think are going to happen are already, we might say, being lived by the next generation. Another figure. This is the citizenship status of the United States Latino population under the age of 18. This is a figure that is rarely talked about. This is according to census data, okay? Of the Latino population currently in the United States under the age of 18, 94% are American citizens by birth. The future of this community is an overwhelmingly, not immigrant community, but an overwhelmingly American community in terms of its citizenship and immigration status. Unless the 14th Amendment to the Constitution is changed. And there are calls every year in Congress to change it, I think in part for that reason. Think of it this way. About 800,000 Latinos and Latinas, Hispanics, turn 18. 800,000 turn 18 every year. Every single year. You see the pattern and implications that I'm suggesting we need to think about, and the potential implications for our politics. Now, two other demographics, and then I want to get to the politics. This is a graphic coming from calculations made of the current population survey entitled The Graying of America. And it's the age distribution of our population. And what I want to